a woman accused of nothing more than immorality, is dragged through the iron gates of a medieval dungeon. The guards laugh as they rip away her clothes, forcing her to the ground. A dull, rusted blade shaves her scalp bald, blood mixing with hair as it falls to the stone floor. Her arms are wrenched back into iron shackles, so tight that the skin splits and blood drips down her wrists. Before she even sees her cell, the executioner presses a red, hot branding iron into her shoulder. Her flesh hisses. The stench of burning meat fills the corridor as her scream echoes off the walls. This wasn't the end of her punishment. This was only the beginning of life inside a medieval prison. When a woman entered prison, she wasn't treated as human anymore. She was reduced to nothing. The first act of humiliation was shaving the head. In medieval society, a woman's hair symbolized femininity, beauty, and dignity. To strip it away was to strip her honor. Chroniclers from England and France describe women being publicly shaved before being locked away, their bald scalps marked as visible proof of disgrace. Next came the shackles. These were not simple chains. Women were clamped into bilboes, iron cuffs fixed to the prison walls that forced them into unnatural positions. Sometimes they were chained so tightly they couldn't even lie down to sleep, leaving them standing for days, their ankles swelling, skin rubbed raw. Medieval prisons were not separate facilities for women. They were filthy stone chambers carved beneath castles, monasteries, or city halls. Damp, dark places where women were thrown together with thieves, debtors, and condemned murderers. Rats scurried across the floors, lice infested the straw, and disease spread faster than the guards could drag out the bodies. Here, women weren't prisoners. They were captives stripped of identity, dignity, and humanity. Some women didn't even survive the first week, not because of the whip or the axe, but because of starvation. Beneath certain prisons were oubliettes, literally, forgotten places. These were vertical pits no wider than a coffin, carved into the bedrock. Prisoners, often women accused of witchcraft or moral crimes, were lowered into these holes through a trapdoor, the only light coming from the ceiling above. Once the trapdoor shut, there was no food, no water, and no chance of escape. Women screamed for hours, sometimes days, their voices echoing in the darkness until silence fell. Chroniclers wrote of oubliettes in France, at castles like Loches and the Bastille, where bodies were found years later. Skeletal remains fused into the stone floor where they had died in their own filth. Starvation wasn't an official sentence. It was convenient erasure. The authorities didn't have to execute these women. They simply abandoned them, and the dungeon itself became the executioner. For women, crime and morality were inseparable in medieval law. A woman accused of adultery, prostitution, or even wandering at night could face branding. The process was deliberate and theatrical. In public squares, women were held down while a glowing hot iron, shaped into a letter, was pressed into their flesh. Some bore a V for vagrant, others a W for whore. In Scotland, women labelled idle or unmannerly could be branded directly on the face. The burning left deep scars, permanent disfigurement that ensured she could never escape her past. The pain was immediate. Screams, the hiss of searing flesh, the smell of human skin cooking. But the true punishment was lifelong. A branded woman could never return to society. Her body itself became a mark of shame, a scarlet letter carved into her skin. She was condemned to live as a walking warning to others. For women accused of witchcraft, the prison itself became the torture chamber. Authorities didn't wait for a verdict. They tortured confessions out of women before the trial even began. The strappado was one of the most common. The victim's arms were tied behind her back, and she was hoisted into the air by a rope until her shoulders dislocated. Sometimes she was dropped suddenly, the shock tearing muscles and ligaments. The thumbscrews crushed fingers until nails split and bones cracked. The boot was even worse. Wooden planks strapped around the legs, with wedges hammered in until bones shattered and blood poured from beneath the boards. Women screamed, fainted, begged for mercy, but the torturers were relentless. Confessions were not only expected, they were scripted. Many women, broken by pain, confessed to crimes they never committed. Worse, they were forced to accuse others, dragging neighbors and even family into the same nightmare. This was not justice. This was a chain of torture, spreading terror through entire towns. Most women who entered medieval prisons never came out alive. Their deaths were rarely recorded. Their names were omitted from ledgers. Their bodies were dumped in unmarked graves outside city walls. But their suffering lived on as a warning. Parents told their daughters, "Do not sin, or you will vanish like the women in the gaols." The system wasn't built to punish. It was built to frighten. Even centuries later, the whispers remained. To be locked in a medieval prison was not just to lose your freedom. It was to lose your body, your dignity, and your name. Women were erased, branded broken, starved, or forgotten. The horrifying treatment of women in medieval prisons wasn't about fairness or justice. It was about control. Every scar, every scream, every forgotten corpse was a tool to keep society in line. These prisons weren't places of law. They were machines of fear. And even though the walls have crumbled, the stories remain. Echoes of a system that believed the best way to rule women was to destroy them.